If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. Midnight shift employees, what's the creepiest experience you've had during your nighttime shift? I was a night shift security guard at a cemetery, and I worked alone. I was doing my rounds one night and I noticed the metal gate to one of the old tunnels was slightly ajar. Then I heard voices. Now these old tunnels were used to store high-value equipment. And policy was that if I found a door unlocked I was to enter and secure the area, and only if I found something amiss to call the police. To be fair, we found doors and gates left unlocked all the time. And of course I have no idea where the light switch is and all the lights are off. So I have to go creeping through these dark-ass tunnels with a flashlight, having no idea what I'm about to find. Turns out one of the maintenance guys left a radio on and forgot to lock the gate. I worked as a locomotive engineer for Amtrak for 37 years. I just recently retired. I drove most of the lines that came out of Los Angeles. That particular night, it was the summer of '97, I was driving the Sunset Limited. The train runs through the desert on its way to Florida, so with no one around for hours I was doing double the speed since we left LA late due to a mechanical problem. It's about 3 a.m. I'm talking to my conductor about how Jordan just won another finals, in doing about 90 miles per hour now. I happen to just light a cig and look out my window and see weird lights coming up from a ridge near us. I saw one bright orange light, then a second. A min later a third. Me knowing we were outside of Phoenix, I said to myself it had to be planes leaving the airport, or F-16s doing a routine training mission. I didn't pay much mind, but it bothered me since planes always have beacons and navigation lights. These orbs, I'd call them, seemed to move around in ways it wasn't humanly possible. We're still driving when my conductor suddenly moves near the windshield, points to something and says, "Holy shit, WTF, is that a black triangle?" I'd estimate the size of football field was over the ridge where we had last seen the orbs and stayed there motionless. We were stunned. After a few minutes it started moving at the same speed as our train, moving closer and closer. I couldn't tell if it was silent since the locomotive I was driving was being operated at high RPMs. The ship passed on top of us slowly. I could see the same colored orbs under the ship I had seen before at the ridge, but other than that nothing else, since it was pretty much impossible to really get out my seat and look. It was just pure black. As the ship hovered above us we started to lose communication with the dispatcher and I started losing power from the train's generator. They seemed to study us for about a minute and then took a sharp 90-degree turn and accelerated at high speed northwest towards Las Vegas. That's when the train suddenly started to operate back to normal. Our dispatcher called us thinking we had derailed since he heard nothing but static from our end. It freaks me out because I know it had to be a UFO. There is no other explanation for something that big moving that slow. I was a skeptic and never believed anything about the paranormal, but after seeing what I did for those brief 30 minutes my life changed forever. A few years ago I realized my experience had happened only a few months after the famous Phoenix lights, where huge UFOs were also seen by thousands in Phoenix, Arizona, including military and law enforcement personnel. I've seen my fair shares of creepy things driving trains late at night, but that topped it. Night shift at a hospital I used to work at. Get report at beginning of shift. Patient is nonverbal due to dementia. Literally the report I get is they have such advanced dementia that they haven't spoken an intelligible word in several years, just mostly grunting and moaning. This hospital was old. Very old. Tiny rooms, kind of a dark place at night. I'm basically trying to get this person's heart rhythm under control for most of my 12 hours. Night shift. It's 2:30 am. I've been running a cardiac drip on this person for hours trying to get things under control, then all of a sudden I see a lethal rhythm on the monitor briefly and go into the room to check on the patient. Look at monitor again, the rhythm is now totally normal. The power in the entire building flickers very briefly and the patient says in perfect clear English, "I was born in 1895, I need to go home," and repeats it several times to my absolute horror. I go get another nurse and patient is now muttering unintelligible sounds again as they had been when I assessed at beginning of shift. Shit you not, this really happened. I don't believe in ghosts, but this incident made me wonder for several months after. Who knows? Maybe it was just a coincidence and the multiple meds they were on. I work as a deputy in a rural county. Night shift. A good portion of my county is national forest. Supposedly there are more miles of roads and trails in this forest than there are miles of interstate in my entire state. It's a massive place. And my zone is about 20 miles of rural highway, bordered to the south by national forest and to the north by another state forest. And it's usually just me out there at night. It's also the kind of place where I know everybody. Anyway, few years back I get dispatched to a crash at about 2 a.m. It's way out in the forest. So far, in fact, the guy that crashed had to call someone with his CB, and that person relayed the crash to dispatch. As soon as I get the vehicle description I know who it is. He's a local that likes to drive back in the deepest, darkest, most remote places in that forest and just ride with his dog in the back. I finally get on scene and his Toyota is piled into a huge old oak on the side of a 2-track. And he's dead white. He tells me with 100% seriousness that he was riding down this 2-track. It was foggy as shit and he got a creepy feeling with all the hair on the back of his neck stood up. Then he says a scorched bony hand reached over from the dark near the passenger seat, yanked his steering wheel to the side and sent him into a tree. He was adamant he saw the devil and the devil made him crash. Now I know this dude. He's definitely not a crazy. There's no booze in the truck and he doesn't seem drunk. I don't really know what to say to him, so I just write it up as a single vehicle crash and give him a ride home. He just sits there in my passenger seat the whole time, looking all around, out the window, up at the sky and back in the cage in the back of my patrol car, not saying a word. So that was weird enough. About a year later, a call comes in late at night for a welfare check. I recognize the name. His relatives say they haven't heard from him for a while and they want us to check on him. I go to the house, his truck is in the driveway. Knock on the front door with no answer. It's unlocked, so I announce myself and walk in. Nobody inside. Open the back door and discover he hung himself on the back porch. He'd clearly been there a day or two. So maybe the devil finished what he started. It's kind of stupid to say, but sometimes when I'm out patrolling by myself in the middle of nowhere at 3 a.m. I remember him and get a creepy feeling. I'm all alone but don't feel alone. I turn the dome light on in my patrol car and look around. I haven't found anything or anyone yet. But that don't mean they haven't found me. When I worked at this skyscraper, I would often go down into the basement level, which was below the underground parking lot. Lots of dark unlit hallways, generators and other stuff. A lady that worked there said she stopped going down there after she heard footsteps following behind her. Another security guard also noted hearing weird noises. One night I was working late and realized I needed to go down there during a power outage. When the power is out, the generators kick on and there are these red strobe lights that would activate down there and flood the dark hallways with bright flickering red lights. Somehow this made it even scarier than before. But the scariest part for me was, while this was technically the bottom-most floor of the building, there was another set of stairs going down. I never had it in me to go down there. Worked security for a local security company that was just starting up and specialized in monitoring heavy levee equipment out in the orchards. I had no radio, no gun, no mace, no flashlight, and no phone service. I was strictly there to monitor and take notes, but if anything did happen, the nearest help was 30 to 45 minutes away in town. Fast forward to a few weeks of night shifts along the levee with it being surrounded by orchards, and I was pretty comfortable at my new location with its one road in and one road out as the only entrance for a few miles. It was about 0230 in the morning when I hear an alarm clock going off somewhere in the murky darkness. I'm positioned alongside the levee in this position, O+O, with my car being the O on the right, the levee is the plus and the alarm sound coming from the O on the left. I turn my car on and drive over the levee to where the workers had a portable office container with a few chairs and a table set up and where it sounds like the alarm is coming from. As my dim high beams started to sweep across the orchard, I see a dark figure multiple rows back seem to fade behind a tree quickly. I stop there and stare into the darkness, barely disrupted by my POS car's headlights. Nothing moves and I can hear the alarm still going off, so I get out of my car and, using my phone's light, I find the culprit sat upon a white plastic table. A single small square battery-powered alarm clock was singing away as my brain screamed at me to return to my car. I quickly popped the batteries out of the alarm and hopped back into my car as the silence returned to the orchards. As I was reversing out of the spot, my headlights bathed the trees in light again, and the same similar shape was now 3 or 4 rows closer, and this time it seemed to crouch down behind a tree. I sat there for a moment longer staring into the void before my brain screeched, "What if there's more and this is the distraction?" That thought encouraged me to back up onto the high part of the levee, and there I waited for the next 3.5 hours alone. It felt torturous. Like 1,000 eyes were burrowing into every inch too of my car and soul from every angle. The quietness of an orchard is something very unsettling in the wintertime, as there's no insects or wildlife wandering about. All I could hear was silence and my pounding heart for the next 3.5 hours of my shift. I almost wanted some monster to come tearing through the trees bellowing out, "Haha, here I am, here to eat you." But instead I saw and heard nothing more. My morning shifter shows up late and starts casually drinking his hot cup of coffee as I give him the rundown while the sun starts to peek into the sky. I still remember the steam trail from his mug and the chirping of early birds as we decided to investigate further into the orchards. We ended up at the spot where I saw the figure, and after some quick scanning he ended up spotting some really large footprints from boots that seemed to pace back and forth in a line along one row of trees. We then tracked them as they led forward towards the worker's office container and abruptly stopped near a tree while still a few rows back. Nothing more. No follow-up footprints leading forward or backwards. No vehicle tracks leading out of the dirt. No one could have gotten past me without trudging through the orchard. It was as if someone appeared, paced back and forth in a line for a few hours, walked forward, and then just disappeared without another step. We reported it to the boss and he shrugged it off, saying maybe it was an elaborate prank by the construction workers, but that was one of the last shifts I worked doing security. Not necessarily midnight shift, but still creepy AF in the dark on a Maui mountain. I used to be a zipline tour guide in the West Maui Mountains. The mountain I worked on, Pukukui, is very sacred to the Hawaiian people. We used to run night tours where people would zip down the last 3 lines. Keep in mind the area of the mountain the course is on is about 2.5 miles up the mountain, one way in, one way out, and it would be noticed if anyone else had come onto the property. When I moved to Maui I was told about the night marchers, the spirits of fallen Hawaiian soldiers. Basically, if you hear drums at night, the marchers are out and nothing good will come from it. I was working with one of the locals who was born and raised on Maui, and we were the last 2 on the mountain, closing everything up. No one else was there, it was pitch black except for the headlamps my coworker and I had, and the vehicle we were using was turned off, and it was dead silent. All of a sudden, I started to hear drums. I thought my coworker was messing with me, until I shined my headlamp on him. I have never seen a more terrified look on someone's face. He immediately stopped what he was doing, said get in the truck. Now. We didn't even finish locking everything up. It normally takes about 20 minutes to get down the rocky dirt road. We were down in 10. I was 3 months into being a driver graveyard shift for a well-known company. Anyways, never got an uneasy feeling at this job site / warehouse ever. But this one night about 2 a.m. felt off. I could shake it. It was like I was being watched, but I was the only one at the warehouse and we do have security that would watch us on CCTV. The security isn't on site. Literally a warehouse that we keep products in and ship back out. Anyways, back to me feeling weird about 2 a.m. as I was alone picking up more items to run back out to stores. I kept shaking this feeling off. I'd pause, look around the parking lot outside and the other surrounding warehouses. There was not a single sound, just crickets and wind. I felt off. I decided to roll down the warehouse doors and secure my truck and step inside to take a leak. I was in the bathroom inside and actually ended up having to poop when my phone alerts me. It's security. I ignore the first 3 calls. 4th call I pick up. Mr. Steam Shovel, we've detected movement at the warehouse inside. Are you secure? Where is your current position? I tell them I'm not in the warehouse and doors are all secure. They make note the alarm system is active and doors outside the warehouse are closed, etc. I'm wrapping up pooping and I get the goosebumps. They said they would check the cameras and call me back to stay put. I finish up and look out through the doors to the warehouse. It's empty besides product. Doors are definitely secured, nothing's unlocked. You couldn't get in, trust me. They call back, Mr. Steam Shovel, we've detected movement again. The sensors are saying there's movement in the warehouse. Are you currently inside the warehouse? I'm literally looking outside the warehouse at this point, nothing is there. I report back, nothing is there. Again I have the chills. Anyways, throat is lumpy. Talking on the phone with security, I decided to leave the warehouse and do my run. Quickly I run to my truck and take off. I'm gone for about 2 hours. And they call me once saying again movement detected, and they don't seem to see anything on the million+ cameras. I arrive back with some cardboard boxes we have to break down into different bins. I'm by myself this time in the actual warehouse and I get this feeling I'm being watched. Can't describe it, but it's like someone was around the corner just staring at me. I couldn't shake it. I finished up my work. I get a text message before my shift that day from my boss saying we need to talk before my shift. Long story short, he tells me someone died in the warehouse 10 or so years ago and it's haunted. We walked out to the warehouse and right where I felt uneasy at the bins, he stopped without me saying anything and said, "This is where I always feel someone is watching me." I never had another experience besides that night. I worked in an airport as ground ops and we'd always have shifts dragged to 3:30 a.m. to wait for arriving planes. Whatever. Used to it. But when I first joined one time I ended up at the end of the airport. This end used to be part of a forest, and was sitting there quietly. Heard the doors slam shut behind me but there was no one. Felt cold all of a sudden and decided to let it be, without informing my officer. A few days later, A friend, A, saw another friend, B, walking past him. I said hello and B just nodded, walking away. I then realized that B isn't on shift at the moment. He called another friend who was B's housemate, and was informed that B was at home sleeping. That was when I realized this part of the airport had its own stories. After a few months of working there, someone told me he was video calling his 4-year-old son at where I sat at 11 p.m., alone, and his screen froze. He went back home only to have his wife tell him that when it froze, they both saw a woman standing behind him and his son asked who that was. Fast forward another few weeks and my friend was opening an arrival at 4 a.m. when she turned and saw some old man smiling creepily at her, at the boarding gate behind where she was. There were no departing flights at that time and security does not allow passengers to be at the gate between 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. I talked about all these to my friend who was a ramp agent and he pointed across the runway. We could see it well, and that's when I saw a bunch of wooden crosses that are apparently graveyards there. Used work in audit, lots of late nights, 2 a.m. or later. Working overnight was not uncommon. Our office tower was the first true skyscraper built in that city and was the tallest building around for many years. Naturally, it became a popular spot for suicides for many years. It was haunted AF. During the day when office workers were everywhere it was pretty much normal. Late at night, after 11 or so, the building would feel very different. The way that office worked is that lowly audit drones like us didn't have assigned desks, but had 3 rows of long tables for floating stations. We faced each other with a divider lengthwise across the middle of the tables, so 6 rows of seating. Teams often worked late, and even after midnight it was common for 1 or 2 teams to be in the office. For some strange reason, even if we started the evening spread out across all the rows, we would end up clustered together on the last 2 rows by the end. The seniors experienced plenty of stuff and some became pretty numb to it. Seniors would insist we all leave together, accompany each other to the toilets, even the guys, and that no one was to work late alone. One time it was only my team of 4 working late, past 1 a.m. at that point. We're busy typing away at our laptops, flipping through papers, occasionally leaning back in our chairs to ask a question. We started hearing typing coming from a different corner of the office. It started when we started and stopped when we stopped. Spooked, the senior said to ignore it and quickly finish up. We hurriedly pick up the pace and do our best to ignore the phantom typing. After that, we start to hear rustling paper and small thumps getting louder, like files/documents being dropped on a table. We're getting freaked out now. The office seems dark even though it's brightly lit and there's this terrible feeling in the air. Without saying a word we start packing our stuff because we're not paid enough for this. Suddenly the lights above the rows in front of us flicker and we all gasp in fear. We're staring wide-eyed at the front rows when one of the office chairs turns and rolls from pretty much the left side to the right side of the office. We bolt out of the office. Forget the laptops and papers, we just grabbed our phones, keys and etc. and we ran out of there. Didn't even turn off the lights. And then we were back in the office the next morning like nothing happened. I made it a point to leave by midnight after that. I'd rather work on stuff on my bed than stay in the office. I used to work on this warship turned museum and they do special events at night. I loved the ones that extended into the midnight hours because there would always be booze and any leftovers was usually free for us to take home. I was floor staff, meaning my daytime responsibilities was to tell people not to touch and crowd control. At nighttime events, my duties is usually making sure people aren't on the ship afterwards or cross into places they can't go into. A few months after I started, I was making my rounds on the ship around 1 a.m., at the very front where the Marines' quarters and anchor chain room was. It was one of the worst feeling moments of my life. To get to that area, you have to take the stairs up. And on my way up, my heart suddenly started beating really fast, a terrifying sense of dread came over me, my hands started shaking, and my breathing quickened. I have an anxiety disorder and thought it was just my anxiety acting up, so I tried my best to ignore it and continued up the stairs, determined to do this quickly and head home. By the time I got to the top, my brain was telling me to run but I ignored that too. I walked through the common area to the Marine quarters, peered inside to make sure no one climbed into the exhibits. The entire time I felt like someone was following me and, instead of turning around to check like horror movies do, I walked faster. As I came close to the anchor room, I heard 2 voices talking. So I climbed through the hatch and was ready to tell them they had to leave but the room was empty and the voices gone. I froze. I don't even know why but I just froze and was scanning the room left and right and left. Suddenly, I heard the same voices on the other side to my right, right outside the other anchor room hatch. So I walked across the room to the hatch. When I got close to the hatch, for some reason, I didn't want to look through it, didn't even want to step in front of it. Instead I backed away, went out through the hatch I came in from, and walked back out to the common area. Just as I got to the common area, I heard the voices behind me. Like right behind me. I ran. I practically flew down the stairs, ran across the hangar deck, down the gangway, and charged my way into the welcome center. I didn't even get to check half the area yet. There was another upstairs area that connected to the flight deck and I was supposed to go through that as well, but I was like, fuck it. Someone else can do it. I ain't dying on this ship. My coworkers were surprised to see me running into the welcome center in a panic. They asked me what happened and I told them. A few of them laughed and told me that this is why they don't go through that section alone at night. Allegedly, there is a malevolent spirit in that section and a lot of people have had unpleasant encounters in there when they go in alone at night. So usually the one who is assigned that area will find a partner to walk through each other's sections together. But since I didn't know and they didn't know I didn't know, I ended up going through alone. The entire museum is supposedly haunted and I'll admit I've seen some things that I can't explain, but there was nothing as scary as that section of the ship. I worked at a boys' home as the graveyard staff. Basically, I stayed up and watched the kids all night to make sure nothing happened. Since there were cameras in each room, I just monitored them from the office on a screen. Down the hallway from the office there was a little room that had a small desk and a ton of books. It was a storage room for school supplies. One night, around 2 or 3 a.m., I hear a pop, kinda like the ones you hear in a fire. I scan each room on the monitor to see if any of the boys were awake. All were asleep. Trying not to spook myself, I just go back to reading. A few minutes later I heard another pop, much louder this time, and I knew it came from that little room. I tried peering into the darkness but I couldn't see anything. I sit there motionless, pretty spooked. Soon enough I hear a series of pops go off and my heart starts pumping. I remember getting goosebumps on my neck and feeling chilly. I grab a flashlight from the desk drawer and shine it down the hall. The door to that little room was almost closed, even though I definitely remember having it open when I clocked in. I keep the light on the door and it starts to slowly open up. I have my phone out, ready to call 911 when I hear something drop loudly down the hall. I still can't see in the room, the door only half open. Soon after that loud thump I hear another. And another. I hear pages being ripped, books being tossed about in there. The thrashing went on for over a minute, all the while I'm paralyzed with fear, forgetting to breathe. After a minute it goes quiet. I can hear my heart beating loudly. I keep the light on the door for what felt like a half hour. Nothing happens. I turn the flashlight off and get up to close the office door when I hear a door slam. I turn the flashlight on and focus on the door. It is now closed. I slam the office door shut and put some filing cabinets in front of it. The rest of the night was uneventful, and when the day staff come I go and check out the room. Everything is tidy and neat, like nothing happened. I worked at that home for a little over a year, and when it burned down, I didn't come back after it was repaired. I refuse to work night shifts in any job to this day. Hey all, CNA who specializes in dementia here. I work in my town's nursing home, part of Trinity Health if anyone is curious. When I first got hired by my nursing home, the aides and nurses on my dementia unit told me creepy stories about strange things that happen, doors slamming and lights turning on and off. I didn't exactly believe them and I just thought they were entertaining stories until one night. It was my usual 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift, and it was just me and another nurse. I was busy charting on the patients I was taking care of and decided to take a break from staring at the monitor to stare at my phone. At this point it's like 2 a.m. and my nurse went on break out to her car to take a nap. I was left to ensure the patients were okay. Now understand, none of my patients walk and are all wheelchair bound, so if they need to get out of bed I would help them, and at 2 a.m. no one is really awake. I go out to the massive dining room to get a ginger ale, and as I was walking back to the nurse's station I heard something fall, and of course I said, "Oh fuck, now I gotta go pick that up." As I go to turn around I see something run towards the oven out of view. Our dining room is an upside down L shape. Of course, like any sane man would I go, "Nurse's name, is that you? Are you throwing shit?" No response. If you and I are playing a game you really need to work on your aim. And no shit, the dining room's radio kicks on and starts playing Frank Sinatra's Fly Me to the Moon. I turned off the radio and called my supervisor to see if she was fucking with me. She was busy up on the other unit, so I was the only staff on my unit at the time. A quick head count revealed everyone was in their beds. I don't go into that dining room in the dark now, and I most certainly leave most of the lights on. I work overnights doing line work for the cable company in a very rural area. Typically I limit my work to stuff that I can do out of my bucket truck due to not wanting to fall off a ladder or utility pole out in the middle of the woods or a field, which means mostly I work roadside. One night however I had to reach a piece of equipment that was off the main road. Thankfully there was a small pull-off that I was able to get my truck backed into far enough to reach with the boom. Now this road I was just off of was some backwater that had zero traffic and maybe 5 total houses down its multi-mile length, which is pretty normal for the area. It was about 3 a.m. when I started working and got into the air. Maybe 10 minutes into my troubleshooting I start hearing noises in the surrounding thick AF woods. These aren't just normal wind noises, mind you, since I could hear them over the sound of my truck and hydraulic pump running. I thought it may have just been deer at first until I heard branches start to snap. I turned off my truck and start looking around with a spotlight. Mind you, I'm about 25 feet in the air with no real way for something to get to me. I finally find where the undergrowth is moving and focus in to see a black bear walking up to the back of my truck. I started my truck back up hoping the noise would scare it off, but to no success. Shouting at the bear doesn't even seem to register. I ended up sitting in the air for another 25 minutes or so waiting for the bear to get bored and wander back off into the woods before I boomed down and sprinted to the cab of my truck and got the fuck out of there. So a few years ago I worked part-time as a cleaner for this office building. For the most part it was a mundane job, but there was one room we had extra rules about. It was a storage room for mostly extra boxes of paper and older equipment and the like, so it didn't seem strange if you just looked at it. However, we had to have 2 people there at a time. One was for cleaning and the other was to hold the door open. Apparently if there wasn't anyone holding the door it would shut and lock from the outside and the lights would turn off. Well, one night I was cleaning in there and the person at the door came in sick and had to make an emergency run to the bathroom. She just ran off and let the door shut behind her. The lights turned off and I could feel this rumbling through the room as shelves started shaking and knocking things off of them. I ran to the door from memory and it had locked, so I started banging on the door. Another coworker was vacuuming the hall and ran over and opened the door. I was scared shitless and ended up quitting not long after since I couldn't feel comfortable in the building any longer. So, I'm a gravedigger. I work for a private Freemason cemetery. We have a small crew, so from time to time we have to put a board over a fresh cremation grave until we can get to filling it in. Last July we have had a really busy day. I ended up needing to finish filling in a cremation hole at about 9:30 p.m. I tell the rest of the guys to go home, I'll handle it. Filling in a cremation usually takes less than 5 minutes. So I jump into the ATV and head out to the marker. I get there and nothing is up. When you bury people for a living, ghost stories really don't bother you anymore. I pull back the board covering the hole and grave my shovel. I turned around to come face to face with the creepiest old man I've ever seen. He has no hair, looks about 80, about the same in weight. His eyes are bloodshot and red from crying. He reaches out and puts a hand on my shoulder and basically collapses into me. The person we were burying was his wife. He had stayed at the cemetery most of the evening waiting for someone to come tend to his wife's grave. After consoling the man for a few minutes, he asks me if he can fill in his wife's grave. Keep in mind, the graves are only about 3 feet deep for a cremation but one. He was old too. Company policy doesn't let anyone but staff conduct burials. The ATV I'm riding has a trailer with all the dirt and sod in it. Nothing too bad, and for some reason, I felt like something really terrible was going to happen if I didn't let him do this. So I handed him a shovel, took the keys from the ATV, and told him I could give him 10 minutes, but after that, he'd have to head home. I was shutting up for the night. I then proceeded to take a walk and have a smoke to give the man some privacy. I came back about 15 minutes later and the grave was completely filled, including the sod being placed back in the ground. I have no idea how the man left without me seeing him. It's a gated cemetery with one entrance that I was walking towards while I gave this guy his moment. Anyways, not super scary, but I do make it a point to make sure all holes are filled before we all head out for the night. Long ago when I was working nights alone at a gas station/convenience store, all sorts of sketchy characters would come and go. They were rarely trouble, but one has stuck in my mind for decades. This distraught girl who was maybe 20 at the oldest, wearing some kind of yellow Bruce Lee and Game of Death jumpsuit, came into the store and she clearly needed help. She was high and confused and scared and had shit herself and she wanted to go home. I had no idea what to do. I don't know if they train you for this kind of thing now, but they didn't then. I tried to get some more information out of her and she said she wanted a cab, so I called her a cab. It didn't even occur to me that she didn't have money, and when the cabbie showed up he found that out quick and left. She still wanted to go home, and I couldn't exactly take her anywhere, and having worked at a gas station for a little while and gotten humiliatingly scammed by wily cashier scammers before, I wasn't going to pony up my own money, which I wasn't exactly flush with, living the kind of life where one works the late night convenience store shift. So I offered, in the nicest and most well-intended way I could phrase it, to call some people who I thought should be able to help her out. She asked if I meant the police, and I very gently said yeah, I think they, and she just ran the fuck out. Of course she did. She was high on something, probably for the first time, possibly not something she even took willingly. I'd just given this terrified young woman one more thing to be scared of. This was my first realization that we can and shouldn't be relying on cops for this mental health shit. Probably should have told her I'd call her an ambulance. So to this day I have no idea what happened to that girl before or after she came into my store, but it's haunted me a little. I used to work at this one-off little fast food joint in this small town. Place was kind of a local institution cause it had been there so long and the burgers were actually really good. The owner was kind of a jabroni, pretty cool overall, but a cheap old miser. So even though practically no one came late at night, he paid such low wages that he turned a small profit by staying open 24/7 for the few that did come. Anyway, the point being that one of the crappy things about working there was everyone had to take turns on these boring AF graveyard shifts. So the first time I'm on the overnight, it's just me and this one other guy. Again, place is dead, so we pretty much just spend the whole time shooting the shit. At some point, he asks me if I know how the current owner got the place. I hadn't lived there long, so I didn't know. I just assumed he was the original owner since he had had it for like 20 years. So then my coworker gets this kind of devious glint in his eye and tells me the story. Apparently, the current owner bought the business dirt cheap, big surprise there, because back in the day there was a murder there. Not just a murder, but a double homicide followed by a suicide. The killer was an employee, a drifter that the original owner had hired as a cook because he felt bad for him. And in fact, it had happened on an overnight shift, the victims just being two guys working there. He says that this is fairly well known among the people who had lived in that town for a long time, and that there is a persistent legend connected to the incident. Late at night, the killer's ghost comes back to visit and finish off the job. His visits were always preceded by the lights cutting in and out and the killer scraping his bloody muted weapon on the door. Ooh 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 ooh, right? Obviously I knew the guy was just messing with me, but it was just late and quiet enough to make me feel a little eerie. So we go back to BSing about other stuff, whatever, just trying to pass the time and stay awake. Well, I guess I didn't succeed cause all of a sudden I feel myself come out of a doze. You know how if a constant background noise suddenly stops it can wake you up? Well, I think that's what happened. Suddenly the buzz from the fluorescent lights is gone, and it's completely dark. I feel a half second of fear until I realize what's going on. I turn toward the light switch and call out to my coworker. Yeah, very funny. Then, with noticeable fear in his voice, I hear him answer from behind me. That wasn't me. He's on the other side of the dining room. No way he could have thrown the switch and made it back over there that fast without me hearing him. The lights turn back on and we just look at each other stunned for a few seconds before the light goes off again. Then it comes back on and starts flickering. I'm seriously weirded out at this point, and I'm telling him to cut it out even though I know he can't be doing it. I hear my voice cracking as I talk. He's trying to play it cool, but I can tell he's as spooked as I am. Then we hear it. A slow, deliberate, unmistakable sound of metal scraping across glass. The lights are still flickering, and we slowly turn to look toward the front door. There's a shadowy, person-shaped thing, and it's clearly moving something across the glass door. We're frozen for what feels like hours. We both know that we're not hallucinating. Finally, my coworker snaps. He had had enough and was just going to confront this thing even if it killed him and ate his soul. So he runs at the door like a madman and is screaming at the top of his lungs, "What are you? Get the fuck out of here." Honestly, one of the bravest things I've ever seen. He throws the door open, ready to confront the ghost, and you know what he finds? Some weird guy asking if we're hiring. WHOTF does that, in the middle of the night? So even though we're a little miffed, we're both super relieved and have a little laugh at ourselves for letting the late night get to us. But then it hits us, like a ton of bricks, and at the exact same time if the scraping was coming from that guy, who was turning the lights on and off. We're instantly terrified again. We look at each other and then slowly turn toward the light switch. And who was there? Fucking Nosferatu. I worked in a now long gone discount pharmacy chain. A poor man's Duane Reade. The place we had was creepy any time of day. Normally I worked early morning shift, but I had a huge order on the truck and wanted to be there to make sure it was stored properly. Now I had heard the stories of aisle 11 many times. At least 3 phantom shoppers were supposed to lurk there due to a fatal fire at the location at least a decade prior. I had never seen one, but even customers would come to me claiming to see someone staring at the shelves in a weird way or people smelling smoke and something burning. I would get there and nothing. Until I waited for the truck. It was after hours. Just us chickens. I was waiting up front having coffee when the supply room supervisor announced the truck had arrived. I headed towards the back. As I passed aisle 11, I saw a movement in the corner of my eye. I stopped and went back, and there was a customer squatting down, looking at the bottom shelf, baby bathtubs, like she was trying to memorize them. I stopped and walked over to her, asking what she was doing in the store as it had closed hours ago. She rose up and started walking towards me aggressively. I backpedaled, doping my coffee, and turned to run. And I ran right into another supervisor. He had been watching the interaction but froze in place. He grabbed my arm and we both hightailed it to the back. As I started telling the manager what had just happened, the supervisor interrupted me, saying Disco was back, his face pale as a sheet. She was one of the phantoms of aisle 11. They called her Disco because she wore a dark orange cat suit with flared legs like were popular in the 1970s. She had been known to actually chase people out of the aisle, as she had just done with me. Needless to say, I quit that night. At one of my previous sysadmin jobs, we were closing down one of our smaller data centers as it was being consolidated into one of our larger ones, but we still had to have at least one person there in case of server issues that had to be dealt with on site. We rotated each week on which one of us would do the overnights there. The place was reportedly haunted, by what I have no idea, just heard rumors from other coworkers when I hired in. So imagine a relatively large open office space that is completely void of all the cubicles, desks, etc. that are normally there, with just one desk and a few random cables hanging from the ceiling. Also, just the lights over my desk were working and bleeding out into my surroundings by about 3 feet. That was where I was for the week lull. I remember sitting there and just hearing ambient noise from the sort of far-off server room, fans, cooling system, etc., working on a server for a customer of ours, and seeing something dart across the room in my peripheral vision. I looked up and didn't see anything, so figured my eyes were just tired from the screen light and making me see like those floaties when your eyes close too tightly. Went back to work, and then about 5 minutes later I saw it again, although this time I heard the bathroom door open and shut, big ass heavy door you pulled open and the mechanism at top of door pulled it shut. Thought maybe one of my coworkers was here for a server fix, so got up and went to greet them and wait for them. About 10 minutes pass and no one comes out of the bathroom. I go in to make sure they're not passed out or hurt. One of my coworkers suffered from seizures, but lo and behold, empty bathroom. Now I'm creeped out. Leave the bathroom and this time see the shadow person thing on the other side of the room dart across again, but looking at it straight on and not from my peripheral vision. Quickly went over and threw the rest of the lights on and started searching the whole office and server room for a coworker, as I was 100% sure they were fucking with me. Never found anyone. Rest of the night was uneventful, as well as the rest of the week, minus me basically shitting bricks sitting at my desk waiting for something else to happen. I work as a Walmart overnight stalker employee. You know, the guy that has to walk back the rent you left in the cereal cause you changed your mind halfway through. Yeah, that is me. About 1 month ago, a manically depressed man walked into my store during the day when I was not there, and threatened to shoot people, but he planned to be killed. I also work at a clinic, where his cousin works, and she told me that he had told everyone he loved them shortly before the incident. He was shot and killed by police officers. When I woke up later that day, everyone was calling me to see if I was okay, as I worked there but on night shift. We resumed work the following day, but we all felt uneasy. No one felt safe or comfortable being alone. It has been several weeks now and I still feel a presence. The overnight shift consists of about 15 people all spaced out across Walmart. The closest person to me is about 100 meters. That makes hearing other people very hard, yet I hear noises at night through my earphones. Everyone experiences getting shocked by various metal objects, which had not happened before. Everyone seems to be super conductive around things. Just last night I witnessed a shopping cart be nudged in front of me. I circled around to see if anyone was near, but everyone was in lunch. I constantly feel watched at night, so much that I have a rosary around my neck since the incident. This didn't happen at night, but still kinda creepy. I work at a bowling alley in northern Minnesota. Once shutdown happened, we all were able to squeeze in some final hours doing cleaning and general maintenance/repairs. Now, some background before I get into this story specifically. We have a ghost named Harry. He worked there around 1960s-ish and was actually killed by a pin setter machine. Harry likes to screw around with us while closing. And once all the lights are off, you don't want to use the bathroom because then he gets borderline violent by slamming the doors and stalls inside. Back on topic, it was me and the assistant manager doing some cleaning, when we suddenly heard loud footsteps in the back, followed by what sounded like bowling pins dropping and being thrown with force. We thought it was an intruder, so I grabbed a large kitchen knife and we went into the back with the machines. It was dark, but there was nothing there. We opened the back door to see if anyone had run, but there was nothing. We both decided we'd had enough for that day and went home. My second job when I was 18 years old, I used to clean a bar in downtown at 4 a.m. after closing. I would show up, disarm the alarm, and make my way to the basement of this really old building where bar was. Upstairs was an old antique shop. No other employees would show up till about 9:30 a.m. Anyhow, I would always hear strange things in the early hours of the morning. Doors open and close, shelves moving, shifting in the walk-in freezer. I always just thought nothing of it, as I figure it's an old building and old buildings make sounds. One particular morning I was in the back getting my cleaning supplies out of a dresser they had in the back when I see a child maybe about 10 years old sprint by out of the corner of my eye. Pale skin, brown hair, red t-shirt and brown shorts. I looked over and I see nothing but decided to follow where he went, and there he is again, but only a glimpse. He had run up the stairs to the rear door to the antique shop and narrow hall/stairway. I look up the stairway and nobody is there. There is literally nowhere he can go without running down the stairs, so I figured he ran through the door. I checked the door and it was locked. That was when I started to get freaked out, because that door can only be locked and unlocked with a key to the bar that only the owner of the building had. I quit a few weeks after that for other reasons, but the image of that kid is still burned in my head 10 years later.